government wants to make it mandatory for all metal traders to have licenses. It's in a bid to combat the massive theft of rail, power and telecommunication lines. We know what an issue rampant cable and metal theft is. It's costing Eskom, municipalities, Transnet and PRASA billions of rands, never mind the inconvenience to you and I, the consumers of those products. So let's find out how we're going to try and do this. I'm joined by Everett Swanepoel from the Copper Development Association of Africa. Everett, good morning to you, sir. Thank you very much for your time. How do we begin to license something that has been unlicensable and unmanageable for so long? Where do we begin doing that? Good morning, Everett.
Good morning, Gareth. Gareth, yes, it's been, as you say, it's been a problem for a long time. We have suggested over the years to government certain systems to try and curb this scourge. Government did introduce some guidelines in 2013. Unfortunately, the scrap merchants were a bit too quick and they soon bypassed those systems. And currently, those systems do not work. And copper cable and copper in general is being exported legally and illegally. And we're engaging with government right now to stop well, not stop the export of scrap, because I don't think that would be a wise move. Not all scrap can be processed in this country. But we've suggested certain things, such as to scrap the payment of cash for scrap. I think that's one of the biggest problems we have.
Yeah.
Increase container inspections. That would be to avoid the scrap merchants from sending out scrap under different tariffs. Auditing of scrap companies is also very important. And I think the latest trend, some of the scrap merchants have basically installed furnaces, and they are burning the scrap cable, melting it into blocks, and then exporting it as billet, which is a legal tariff.
Yeah.
And of course, thereby bypassing the system that ITEC introduced in 2013, and we don't hear or see of it again.
Everett,
So
help me understand something very quickly. Everett, forgive me, because I'm not very au fait with the industry and metal trading in South Africa. So right now, for metal traders, there are no licenses. So as it stands right now, copper cable is being stolen from a variety of sources. That then arrives at a metal scrap depot. What is the obligation of a metal trader today? To report copper or to keep track records of copper? What is currently in place?
No, Gareth, what the requirement at the moment is that any scrap merchant has to be licensed under the Second-Hand Goods Act. In other words, I won't go into detail, but the Second-Hand Goods Act gives the authorities the right to enter the premises and check for the copper cable, any form of copper, and then obviously the trader must produce documents that metal was purchased from somebody. So that's the only requirement at the moment.
So would you support the call from government to have licenses now put into place? I mean, I know you mentioned 2013, there were some changes. That made next to zero difference at all. Would licenses, as a last question to you, make a difference? Would you support that call? And if so, what would that license need to look like? What stipulations?
You know, Gareth, my honest opinion is the license wouldn't be any different to what we have at the moment. The bypassing of the system and the export of scrap illegally will continue. I mean, the license will simply be ignored. It's a very huge industry, and I think the policing it is going to be extremely difficult. To police the Second-Hand Goods Act that we have in place at the moment is a difficulty in itself. Now, if one introduces a license, it won't do any harm, but I cannot see officials policing licenses effectively. But that's my personal view.
And in just a few seconds, if you can, in your personal view, government is looking at you as Everett Swanepoel from the Copper Development Association of Africa going, okay, Everett, what would you want us as government to do? What are you telling them?
Gareth, to repeat what I said earlier on, the cash for scrap, the increase of container inspections, A very important point, the auditing of scrap merchants, and in particular those with furnaces. In other words, they have to prove where they got the copper from and who they're selling it to. It's as simple as that. And of course, then include that particular action in the under the ITAC scrap export system.
Yeah.
Now, that briefly, what that says, if you want to export scrap, you have to apply for an export permit through ITAC. Now, the problem is, whilst there are these controls, many of the scrap merchants are bypassing the system, not applying for the export permits, and that copper scrap goes out without any check whatsoever.
And that's exactly that's why I wanted you just to sum that up for me one more time so we can understand how to take the conversation forward. Everett Swanepoel from the Copper Development Association Africa joining us this morning. It's such an important discussion to have as well, because if you handle and manage better where the market exists for the copper, then you could, in turn, or this is at least the thinking, what you could end up with then is if it's more managed, more regulated, we may see a downturn in copper cable theft from Transnet, Eskom, streetlights, robots, you name it. It could actually change the way we handle that kind of situation here in the country. Where are we heading up to?